Welcome everybody to Château Lagrange. My name is Elisa and I'm in charge of the wine tourism in Château Lagrange, and today I will give you a live tour in partnership with Wine Pass. So I'm very happy to give you this tour of Château Lagrange. We will start with the vines. I will explain to you the vineyard, the different grape varieties that we have here in Château Lagrange and the different wines that we produce. Then we will see the beautiful chateau. I'm going to explain to you the history of Château Lagrange. Then we will see the vat room to explain you the vinification, and then the cellar to talk about the aging of our wines, and we will finish with the best part, the tasting of different wines. So here in Château Lagrange we have 118 hectares of vines all around us in one block. So you can see all around the estate we have a lot of vines. We have three grape varieties, a majority of Cabernet Sauvignon, which is the typical, the main grape variety of the Medoc. Why? Because we have here a gravelly soil. So if you come closer you can see that we have gravels here everywhere. Gravels, it's the pebbles that you can see here. It's the typical soil of the Medoc, and it's the perfect soil to grow Cabernet Sauvignon because it's a very poor and draining soil. So we have 67% of Cabernet Sauvignon planted here. Then we have Merlot, 28% of Merlot, and then Petit Verdot, 6% of Petit Verdot. Every year we do a blending wine, so we blend the three grape varieties and we produce two different wines. Château Lagrange, of course, that you know, it's the first label and it's a third classified growth in 1855. And we started to produce a second label in 1983 called Les Fiefs de Lagrange. Fief in English means fiefdom. And it's the wine that we produce the most here in Château Lagrange. So two wines here produced here, so in the appellation Saint-Julien. Then we started to produce in 1996 a white wine. So we have the vines at few kilometers from here, and we have 11 hectares planted with Sauvignon Blanc in majority, Sauvignon Gris, Grey Sauvignon, and Sémillon. So it's also a blend of three grape varieties, and it's a dry white wine, but very complex, very interesting. I will explain to you with more details during the tasting. And we also do another red wine production, an Haut Médoc production. So the vines are in the appellation Haut Médoc, not so far from here. And we started this production in 2012, and it's called the Haut Médoc de Lagrange. So three red wines, one white wine, so four wines in total. Here you can see it's called a test plot. So we tried to plant all grape varieties. So we have the Cabernet Sauvignon, the Petit Verdot, the Merlot, but we also have the Malbec, Carmenère, Cabernet Franc, only one line for each, and it's really a test for us because you know the weather is changing, the global warming is here, so we just want to try different grape varieties. We have a weather station here, so every year we compare the rainfall, the sun, the temperatures, and we compare the quality of those each grape variety to see if maybe in the future we will grow Malbec, Carmenère, Cabernet Franc, why not? But for the moment the best are Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot and Petit Verdot. Now I'm going to show you the chateau and I'm going to explain to you the history of Château Lagrange. Let's go! On the way to see the chateau, I wanted to talk to you about the environmental practices done here in Château Lagrange. So in 2000 in Château Lagrange we started to do some actions like about the farming. We have 20 hectares organic and 10 hectares biodynamic, so we work with the moon. And we also have a global biodiversity commitments. Like here you can see the beehives. We have some bees in Château Lagrange. We have sheep, and we encourage in general in the 40 hectares of park the biodiversity. Let's go to see the chateau now. So here we are in front of the beautiful Château Lagrange, and you can see all around us we have a very beautiful park of more than 40 hectares. We have a nice lake, and we know that this lake was here during the 18th century, so it's a very old lake. And you can see just behind the lake the highest point of the appellation Saint-Julien at 24 meters. About the history of Château Lagrange, if you look at the architecture of the chateau and the tower, you can see that those two architectures are different. The chateau, it's really the typical architecture of the 18th century, very classical, very symmetrical, that we called chartreuse in French. And the tower is different, more modern, and with an Italian and a Tuscany influence. So the chateau was built during the 18th century, and the tower was designed and built during the 19th century, designed by Louis Visconti. Visconti, an Italian architect. He gave to the tower an influence, a Tuscany and an Italian influence, and a very romantic style, with a nice balcony that you can see on the tower. About the history of Château Lagrange, here in Château Lagrange we had many different owners, French families a lot, different French families. We had very important owners like the Comte du Châtel. He was very important because he had a very modern way to think about viticulture and about vinification, and he participated in the classification for us in 1855. Today, and since 1855, we are a third classified growth. We had also the last family, the Sendoya family, from the Basque coast of France. They were here just before the last owner, and they sold the chateau in 1983 to Century, a Japanese company, a Japanese familial company. They arrived here in 1983, and they invested a lot of money here in the vat room, in the cellar. We also now have a bottling machine, a bottling line machine. So they invested a lot of modern investments. So we are very modern in the vat room and very traditional in the vineyard. We still do some handworks a lot, but in the vat room it's very modern. In Château Lagrange, we now welcome guests. So we have a chef, we have a Japanese chef. He is working here, is doing a gastronomic French cooking with a Japanese influence. And now we can welcome guests for lunch and dinner. So if you want to enjoy a very nice lunch paired with the wines of Château Lagrange, you are welcome to do that here in Château Lagrange. Now I'm going to talk about the vinification in the vat room. So let's go to see the tanks. So now we are in the vat room, and you can see that we have a lot of tanks here and also on the first floor. In total we have 102 tanks for 103 plots. So we do a plot by plot vinification to be very precise and to work differently each plot. So you can see we have big tanks of 220 hectoliters and smaller tanks. It's from 36 hectoliters to 220 hectoliters to really pair with each plot of the vineyard. Here you can imagine we do the harvest by hands, so all is done by hands. Those gates are always open, and it's outside that we do the sorting of the grapes. So we will do, of course, a first sorting in the vines done by the pickers, and the second sorting by hands. Then we have another machine to do a sorting by machine, and it's an optical sorting machine. So it's very precise. It scans each single grape about the color, the size and the shape, and collect the best grape. So we always do that for the first label and the second label. After that, we have a machine to crush the berries, and then you can see here the pipes bring the grapes, so the single grapes, inside the tank by the top of the tank. And when the tank is full, we will start to do the fermentations. Here, everything is computer controlled, so let me show you the control of the tanks. So, here you can see on the two screens we have the tanks and the temperature of the tanks in green. Today everything is empty, that's why the temperature is quite cold. But during the vinification we will need to be very precise about the temperature to start the fermentations. So we start with the alcoholic fermentation. We need 28 degrees inside the tank. We add yeast. Yeast is the sugar to turn it into alcohol thanks to the temperature. So it's very classical fermentation. In the same week, we will do the malolactic fermentation. So because the tank is quite warm, we will continue with the malolactic fermentation, and this fermentation is done to remove the acidity of wine. So it's a natural bacteria who change the malic acid between the lactic acid, and it's done in the same week. So we save a lot of energy by doing that. We also avoid to develop bacteria between those two fermentations, and we are also very precise because when the malolactic fermentation is done, it's really easier to taste the wine because there is no acidity in the wine. I'm going to show you the tanks closer to talk about what we are doing after. So, after the fermentations, what happens, because we had a very warm temperature inside the tank, the skin and the seeds are detached from the wine, and there is two layers inside the tank, the skin and the seeds and the wine below. At this moment, the wine is like a rosé. It's very clear. It's not very concentrated. So what is very, very interesting and very important for us is inside the skin and the seeds. So the color, the tannins, and the flavors of wine. So we are doing what we call the pumping over for extraction work. So with a pipe, we will extract the wine, and then the wine is going at the top of the tank. Someone at the top of the tank spray the wine, and the wine goes through the skin and the seeds to extract everything. It's like coffee with water or tea with water. It's the same process. This process is quite long. It's done 3 times per day during 3 weeks. It's really important to do a very long extraction to not be too aggressive for the wine. After that, we separate what we call the free-run wine, so the wine, and then we will remove all the skin and the seeds that we have inside the tank, and it can be very, very big, like a layer like this. So we need someone to go inside the tank to remove everything by hands, and then with the machine we press the skin and the seeds, and we do what we call the press wine, which is very concentrated, very full of tannins, very harsh to drink by itself, but very important to blend with the rest of the wine to give color, to give concentration, to give complexity. So we keep this wine, and during the blend done in January, so next week we will start the blend of 2020 vintage. We will taste everything blind, the Cabernet Sauvignon, the Merlot, the Petit Verdot of the different plots, and the press wine, and we will blend everything. Every year the blend is different because every year the weather is different, so we really adapt the blend to the weather conditions, but also to the style of the wine that we want to produce. After the blend, what we are doing after is the aging of our wines. So I'm going to show you the barrels now in the cellar. So here we are inside our cellar. You can see we have a lot of barrels here in Château Lagrange, around 5,000 barrels of French oak, only French oak. We age the wine here in barrel because we want to stabilize the wine and give aromatic complexity to our wines. So the barrels are only French because the aromas extracted with the French oak are very elegant, not too strong, very interesting mixed with the wine. Here we have the 2020 vintage aging here. So you can see it's not blend for the moment. So if you look closer, you have the name of the plot writing on the barrel. So PV2, it's for Petit Verdot number 2. Here on the other side, it's the Cabernet Sauvignon number 8. And then we will blend and we will age the wine already blend. At the top of the barrels, there is different names, and it's because we work with different coopers, different barrel makers. It's interesting to have complexity also. So we work with 7 different barrel makers, and we try every year different coopers to work with different brands every year and to have more complexity. Château Lagrange is aging for 20 months with 60% of new oak. Les Fiefs de Lagrange for 14 months and the white wine for 6 months. After 4 years, we don't use the barrels anymore because the wine drinks all the oaky aromas or the oaky flavors of the barrels. So it's for another production, the whiskey production. And maybe you know that Suntory, it's a whiskey company. So we send everything, we send the barrels to Suntory in Japan, and they reuse our barrels to make whiskey inside. So here we have the white wine barrels. We have, like I told you, 11 hectares planted with Sauvignon Blanc mostly, and then Sauvignon Gris and Sémillon. So we age for 6 months the white. For the vinification, we press at the beginning, we press the grapes, and then we'll do the fermentation in barrel, the alcoholic fermentation, because the malolactic fermentation is not done to save the acidity, to keep the acidity, because it's a dry white wine. So the alcoholic fermentation is done in barrel, and then we will do the bâtonnage. So we will mix the lees with the wine to avoid the oxidation of wine and also to give more complexity to this wine. Then 6 months in barrels, then it's blend and bottle. It's not an aging wine, so it's a wine that you can enjoy very quickly. And because it's aged in barrels, it's a dry white wine, but with complex oaky flavors, which is really interesting. Now, I'm going to show you a secret place. So let's go to see this very beautiful place called the Wine Library. So here we have 80,000 bottles of Château Lagrange and Fiefs de Lagrange. We are very happy because we find a very old vintage for Château Lagrange here in the cellar of Château Lagrange, 1926 vintage. So it's a very old bottle. And here we keep like a museum of old bottles of Château and Fiefs de Lagrange. And we also organize tastings, like the meeting with the winemaker. So it's a part of our wine tourism offer. You do a tour with a guide of Château Lagrange, and then you enjoy a tasting of old vintage of Château Lagrange with the winemaker. So if you have many questions about the vinification, the aging of everything, you can do that here with the winemaker and with a tasting of very, very enjoyable vintage and very old vintages. Let's go to do the tasting of our wines now. Welcome in the boutique of Château Lagrange. Let's go in the tasting room to do a nice tasting of 4 wines. So if you book a private tour in Château Lagrange, you will do this very beautiful and very nice tasting. Of course, we propose many different tours and tastings, like vertical, blind tasting. We also do a blending workshop. So you make your own blend of Château Lagrange wine. And here is the tasting of the private tour. So we taste 4 wines. We start with the lighter wine, so with the white wine called les arômes de Lagrange. Arôme, it's the name of a white flower called lily flower in English, and we taste the 2018 vintage. 2018 vintage is a very good year, very good vintage for red production and white production. For this tasting, we start to see the color of the wine, and because it's a young wine, the color is not very orangey or very yellow, it's a very clear color. And then we smell the wine for the first time. It's the first nose, and it's where we see the most delicate flavors of the wine. Then we swirl the glass, so if you're not comfortable, you can do it on the table. And when we smell again, the smell is much more developed, much more powerful, because the wine is in contact with oxygen, so we can have many different aromas, many different flowers, aromas here in the second nose. The blend of this wine, like I told you, is Sauvignon Blanc, Sauvignon Gris, and Sémillon. Sauvignon Blanc, it's very interesting for the citrusy flavors, and Sauvignon Gris, it's very interesting for the passion fruit flavors that we can smell. It's not very common here in the region, so it's really interesting to have some mango or pineapple flavors in the dry white wine. And the Sémillon is really good because it's very round, it's very pleasant. So blend together, it's a dry white wine, but also a little bit sweet and a little bit oaky, very complex. So cheers. It's a wine that you can enjoy with different foods like white fish, white meat, seafood. It's not complicated to pair this wine because it's light, but it's not too light. It's quite complex. Then we can enjoy the Haut-Médoc de Lagrange. This wine, we created this wine in 2012, and it's done with Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot. 60% of Cabernet Sauvignon and 40% of Merlot, planted not so far from here in the Haut-Médoc appellation, but the wine is done here in our facilities. Today, you can see we taste the 2016 vintage, very, very good year. And it's a wine that you can start to enjoy now because it's pretty light and pretty easy to drink. The color is quite purple because it's young. So when the color is purple or ruby, it's because the wine is not very old. And when it starts to be orangey, browny, it's because the wine is a little bit old, like more than 10 or 15 years. 2016 is young. So about the first nose, it's very fruity, very blackcurrant and cherry aromas. On the second nose, we can smell some oaky, very subtle oaky flavors. So it seems to be a very fresh and very fruity wine. Let's try it. So if you want to develop the aromas of the wine inside your mouth, you can chew the wine in your mouth, and you will really enjoy everywhere in your mouth the different flavors of wine. So this wine is really an easygoing wine, enjoyable, with a nice meal with friends. It's very easy to drink, so don't hesitate to enjoy this wine now, or maybe in 5 years if you want to keep it a little bit. Then we go in the appellation Saint-Julien, and we taste les fiefs de Lagrange and the Château Lagrange. Les fiefs de Lagrange, second label, we will try the 2015 vintage, which is a really, really good year. And the blend for Les Fiefs de Lagrange is 55% Cabernet Sauvignon, 41% Merlot, and 4% Petit Verdot. So, because it's a very, very good vintage and it's the second label, you can start to enjoy now, but you also can wait for 10 years more, no problem, even 15 if you want, because it's a very, very good wine. So the color is not so different, but maybe a little bit more concentrated, a little bit more darker. And the smell is much more complex, so we can enjoy some fruity aromas, of course, but it's also aromas from the barrels like licorice and tobacco flavors. Then let's try it. So it's quite complex in the mouth, full-bodied, but also with a nice acidity. It's the aftertaste is quite long, but the acidity is still present. So it's very interesting to keep the good balance with aromas and acidity. But if you want less acidity, you can also age it for 5-10 years more, no problem. And you can pair it with a meal quite complex, because this wine is start to be very complex and very interesting. And after that, we will finish with Château Lagrange, and we will enjoy the 2005 vintage. So the blend of this wine is 46% Cabernet Sauvignon, 45% Merlot, and 9% Petit Verdot. 2005, it's a really good vintage, and this wine, you can enjoy it now, but you also can age it for 10-15 years more if you want, because it's a very exceptional year. So if we look at the color of this wine compared to the other wines that we tried, we can see the complexity. We can see this wine is older. The color is much more orangey, browny, less red, less ruby, and the concentration is very important. It's really darker compared to Les Fiefs de Lagrange. The smell also really complex. We can smell many different aromas, like fruity aromas, but also oaky and earthy aromas, and oaky like tobacco, coffee also. So the smell is also very complex, and now let's try it. So the taste is much more complex, full-bodied. You can feel the wine everywhere in your mouth. There is a good balance with complexity and acidity and very long aftertaste. So if you like it now, you can really enjoy it now with many food, like complex meal, and fruity cheese, dark chocolate. You can enjoy it for a special occasion, for example. And if you really want less acidity, more earthy flavors, you can wait for 10-15 years, no problem. So if you want to do this tasting, if you want to enjoy a nice tour and a nice tasting here in Château Lagrange, don't hesitate to contact us. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoy this tour and this virtual tasting, and I hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.